right, y'all, so we actually have, I want to give you all a heads up. So Dr. Bopp and myself actually collaborated this year. So our thesis groups worked together working on the same project. And so what you're going to hear from one group is going to focus on one side of the project, and then the group following will focus on another. So I'll turn it over to my team to talk about positive and negative affect.
Okay, hello everyone, my name is Kai.
My name is Steven.
I'm Rachel. I'm Sun.
We also have an additional member, Madeline Wilson, but she is currently not here with us today. Ice, maybe? We're going to find out. Today we're going to talk about the effects of acute cold water exposure on positive and negative affect.
So our plan is we're going to go over the background of cold water immersion, also known as CWI. We'll talk about our purpose and our methodology, and then discuss our results and some key findings. Okay, so by show of hands, how many people have participated in a cold plunge? Well, then maybe you have felt some of the effects after you got over the initial cold shock. Cold water immersion has been utilized for centuries for its therapeutic properties. When it is discussed, it is common to think of ice baths, typically used in athletes for recovery purposes. Elite, well-known athletes like LeBron James, Michael Phelps, and Naomi Osaka have reported to perform better and for a longer duration because of the anti-inflammatory properties. However, the science and practical applications of icing have changed over the past 2 decades. Celebrities and influencers have been seen using CWI for a variety of reasons, including boosting immunity and daily energy levels, as well as a beauty tactic or even a facilitation in weight loss. Due to the potential benefits, cryotherapy, including cold showers, continues to seek the attention of many people.
So in order to fully appreciate the potential benefits of cold water immersion, it's important that we first understand its rich history. The advantageous effects of cold water immersion on human biological and emotional state functioning have been well supported throughout history, with documented evidence dating as far back as 1800 BC. However, it is important to note that these previous studies have only used a pre-post-test design. With this, the current study's use of a control group in our experimental design makes it one of the first of its kind. In the current study, we extensively reviewed previous research regarding experimental protocols for cold water immersion, and we concluded that short-term or acute cold water immersion can be defined as 3 to 12 minutes immersed in 14 degrees Celsius water or 57 degrees Fahrenheit. Now let's turn our attention towards the previous research that has demonstrated effects on biological, emotional, and cognitive functioning. In regard to the biological effects, previous studies have demonstrated the ability of cold water immersion to elicit an increase in blood concentration levels of norepinephrine, epinephrine, as well as dopamine. Looking at the emotional effects, we see earlier studies have posed short-term cold water immersion as a mechanism that can be used to increase levels of positive affect, decrease levels of negative affect, as well as decrease symptoms of anxiety. And then in regard to cognition, the group that's going to come up and present after us will speak more to the relationship between short-term cold water immersion and its effect on cognitive functioning. And so based on this previous research, we created a framework that we used to develop 2 separate hypotheses. We first hypothesized that short-term cold water immersion would increase participants' levels of positive affect. Our second hypothesis was that short-term cold water immersion would not only decrease participants' levels of negative affect, but also decrease their levels of state anxiety, which is a term that's used to refer to current or active anxious moods.
So for our design, we recruited college students from Wofford College. We had a total of 216 individuals be screened for our survey. So we had a Qualtrics survey that went out that had inclusion and exclusion criteria questions that we had individuals fill out to make sure that they qualified. And we had a total of 109 individuals out of the 216 qualified, and we were able to test and run a total of 49 of those individuals. Now for those 49 individuals, we randomized them into 3 separate groups. So we had our control group and then our cold group, which was then subdivided into an arm group and a full group. So for our control group, we had them experience a non-cold stressor. We used the NBAC, which is a cognitive task that has been shown to create mild stress within participants. And then for our post-stressor assessment, after they were exposed, we had them fill out affective measures as well as complete cognitive tasks, which the following group will get into more detail about. And then 4 hours after their testing session, we had them complete an additional follow-up survey, which only included those affective measures. Now for the cold arm group, we exposed our participants to a cold stressor. So we had individuals stick their non-dominant arm in a cold tub of about 59 degrees plus or minus 2 up to their elbow crease for about 3 minutes. And then they completed the same post and follow-up assessment procedures as the control group. And then finally for our full group, it was the same procedure as the arm. Instead of the arm, we had participants submerge their entire body in the cold tub up to their chin for 3 minutes and then complete the same post and follow-up assessments. Now for our affective measures in the assessments, we looked at the PANIS and the STAI. So the PANIS is the positive and negative affect schedule. So that is a rating scale of 20 items that were rated between 1 to 5. And it had 10 positive words and 10 negative words. So they rated items of 10 positive words such as being excited or interested or happy. And then 10 negative words such as being angry, hostile, or feeling guilty. And then for the STAI, that is the state trait anxiety inventory. Specifically for our study, we looked at state anxiety, which Stephen previously mentioned is current feelings of anxiety and current expression of anxiety at that moment. So we used another rating scale of 20 items rated 1 to 4, and they rated statements such as, I feel upset or I'm content, anything to signify that current experience with anxiety. So for our results, we looked at 3 main components. We looked at 2 main effects, which is basically how the individual variables of time and condition had an impact on the results, and then an interaction, which is how time and condition influenced each other to create certain results. And we found that for positive affect, there was a main effect of time, which basically suggests that regardless of whichever condition you were in, we saw a decrease over time of positive affect between post-assessment and then 4 hours after to the follow-up assessment. Now for negative affect, we did not see any significant main effects or interactions, so regardless of group or time or influence of each other, there was no significant difference in affect, negative affect. And then finally, we also found no significant interactions or main effect on state anxiety.
So the purpose of our experiment was to examine the effects of acute cold water immersion on affect, and our hypotheses that there would be an increase in positive affect and a decrease in negative affect and state anxiety were not supported. However, the current study contributed to the limited literature regarding acute CWI and can serve as a framework for future research. There's a variety of reasons as to why our results were not significant, including Hurricane Helene, which impacted our recruitment and the running of participants, which we'll talk about some more limitations on the following slide.
Everyone, a few limitations of our study included a lack of participants, which left us with a lack of power to run a 3-group analysis. Although we had 109 people complete the survey and qualify for the study, only 49 were actually scheduled, and this lack of participants left us again with a lack of capability to run the 3-group analysis of the effect. We also had a very homogeneous sample. We only used participants that were undergraduate students at Wofford College, which leaves us with students that all have a very high baseline positive affect and low baseline negative affect. And so we had a lack of diversity in our samples starting from the baseline. Finally, the design was too complex considering both pre and post testing were required. Cognitive testing included in the measurements may have provided some additional noise, but we also had to bank on people completing the 4-hour follow-up survey, and out of the 49 participants, only 36 completed the follow-up survey, leaving us with 27% of participants not completing the 4-hour follow-up survey. Given this information, had we had a higher percentage of people complete the follow-up survey, we might have had some significant results in that 4-hour follow-up.
These limitations allude to future directions such as the following. like a longitudinal study of older adults facing more harsh real-world stress, like the following listed here: finances and bills, family, children. However, if future studies find that to be not feasible, then conducting a study during the hardest 1 to 2 weeks out of the school year for students would also be another option, as well as looking at 6 main types of affect. So in our study, we looked at the changes in positive and negative affect, whereas looking at the 6 main types of affect could potentially bring up some more specific results. Another potential direction would be looking at chronic multifactorial stress as a baseline and looking at individuals with psychological disorders. Now we're going to focus on those, and previous research has shown that chronic multifactorial stress, which can be defined as long-term stress due to a number of factors like poor diet, lack of sleep, lack of physical health, lack of socialization, and other factors like that, may actually endure a more negative reaction due to the acute cold exposure. Since we don't have any data on chronic multifactorial stress, then we wanted to look at the effects of psychological disorders, and we did that through an exploratory analysis from the full body cold condition group. And essentially what we saw, or what it appeared to be, was individuals with a diagnosis of a psychological disorder. They actually saw that they did not experience the hypothesized effect, whereas those without a psychological disorder did see the hypothesized effect, which again was an increase in positive affect, a decrease in negative affect, as well as state anxiety. Overall, these are important to consider in future research and should definitely be considered in future directions.
Awesome. Well, we just wanted to take this opportunity to thank everyone who contributed to the success of our study: Dr. Hilton, Dr. Bopp, and our peer researchers, our research assistant, Isabel Ashwood, as well as everyone who participated in the study. And with that being said, we'd like to dive into some questions.
All right, question.
I have a couple of questions. First, did you all try out the hole punch before you subjected your participants to it? Yeah. How did that go?
I had a good experience with it.
I had a pretty good experience with it as well.
You gotta get through the first few seconds.
Yeah, right. So the 4-hour follow-up, that sounds really tough to get people to do what they need to do after 4 hours. Any ideas how to get your participants to do what they need to do? Because you lost, what, 20-something% of your participants. Any ideas how to get them to do what they need to do in that follow-up?
So, yeah, so I would say the 4-hour follow-up was definitely where we saw a pretty big struggle. You know, I think increasing an incentive could be one area to explore, but I also think another area to explore is still maintaining that control group, but instead of doing a follow-up, doing a pre-post-test design, so you're able to test them right after they do it, so you don't lose that data.
We also did have some incentive for them, so we said that those who completed the 4-hour follow-up were entered in a chance to win an additional gift card. So we did have a little bit of incentive, but we could definitely look into, in future research, maybe increasing that incentive or altering that in some way.
And then the last question I have, I was just curious, so you started with 216 that were screened.
Correct.
And then after that, I was wondering if you could just explain a little bit, from screening them, how did you know that people were then qualified? I'm sorry if I missed that, but because you went from 216 to 109 to the final 49, and you know, what did it take for people to be qualified? I'm sorry.
You guys remember the exclusion criteria?
I think so, yeah. So for exclusion criteria, it was basically those who would have some sort of health, like physiological health reaction to cold water. We excluded athletes, or just typically those who had common experience with cold exposure, because they would kind of maybe have a null effect or a blunted effect given that they use it so often. And then those who might also have like an extreme psychological reaction to it. So basically anyone who might pose as like a risk or like liability to us. were excluded from that, but then other individuals who, might not have had those risks as well as, were interested, did not have prior common experience within, I think we said a month or two of doing it, were then included in the study.
Was this kind of what you expected to go from this initial screening of over 200 to ending up with 30? Did you expect to lose a lot of people? Is that natural for this kind of research?
What happened, y'all?
So I would say we set out with high hopes to, get around double to triple of what we ended up with. A couple of things that we saw happen. So it was difficult to maintain scheduling and recruitment with Hurricane Helene. That was a 2-week period where those who were already planned to be scheduled had to be rescheduled, which we saw a lot of dropout there. It was a 2-week period where, we didn't have people's eyes on the recruitment process. So we weren't in front of people for that 2 weeks, and I think that was a very crucial period of time that, really cost us on our participants.
We had to double recruitment periods because it was a huge fluctuation, and then after the hurricane it kind of fizzled out. So we had to go through another recruitment period, but because of the weirdness of the schedules after Helene, it was really difficult to get people back in, and people were leaving, and so the hurricane really had messed up a lot of our recruitment. So I think that's why we saw a lot of significant dropout with rescheduling and everything.
No, John, not you.
Okay. It sounds like your demographic was largely Wofford students. You talked about, with your follow-up research, looking at chronic multifactorial stressors that could kind of have more of an impact on a study like this. Did you account for, within your variables, the multifactorial stress that college students generally experience? And would that not count in relation to what you're talking about here?
I don't believe that we looked at chronic multifactorial stress in our actual study, but we were saying that it would be interesting to look at because we were essentially only looking at affect, whereas I mentioned earlier, the chronic multifactorial stress is a lot more factors that we would have to evaluate, like maybe questioning specifics like how much sleep did you get this week, or how's your diet, how often do you exercise, more variables like that.
Dr. Lefebvre?
So I have a question for Matt Wilson. Did you get her back?
Live from the air.
All right, never mind. You guys can probably answer this. Why didn't you do the pre-post design? I was surprised to see that you didn't have a before submersion level of positive and negative affect and state anxiety. You only have follow-up post and then follow-up. Where's the pre?
So this study was building on a previous study that was similar to ours that was conducted in last year's thesis. I think it's important to understand that this research is extremely novice. It's very new, and so there's not a lot of research to go off of. And so what we're trying to do here is be an exploratory study that adds to the body of knowledge that's so limited. So we chose to go with a post-test and a 4-hour follow-up based on a framework that we had to see if that would have any different effects versus the pre-post test, which has already been done multiple times.
Do you remember the DAS? A pre-test? So there was a pre-test, and Dr. Hilton and I had a little mess up of the fact that we had no way to correlate their pre-test with the participants' number, because we didn't have participant numbers when they did the qualifying.
So to get back to your question, Dr. Chris, when they filled out the screening was just a QR code around campus. You pulled out your phone and just popped it up, and you only gave your data that could be identified if you qualified. And so you gave your email, and that's how we reached out to you. But because of that, basically we created a problem for ourselves being able to tie back that initial data at a pre-test level. And so we probably are going to try to do that, but it's going to be really wonky to try to find how to make that. We're going to need 3 or 4 different data points to connect them. So we just didn't do it yet, but we will.
And the goal is that the more times you take a test, then it changes your answers. So we wanted a different pre-test, right? So that you wouldn't have a change in response based on on just repetition. It's a tricky one.
All right, let's get them off. Get the
Yeah.
next